Marvin Kalb in Washington, Bill Plant in Los Angeles, Nelson Benton in New York, Daniel Shore on Capitol Hill, Robert Pierpoint at Bethesda Naval Hospital, and tonight, the final of our special reports, Where They Stand, the candidates on the issues of Campaign 68.
Good evening. Richard Nixon said today he had been told and had learned it is true that top administration officials, quote, have been driving very hard for an agreement on a bombing halt, accompanied possibly by a ceasefire in the immediate future. He said he also had been told, but does not believe, that, quote, this spurt of activity is a cynical, last-minute attempt by President Johnson to salvage the candidacy of Mr. Humphrey, end quote. Nixon's statement brought an immediate response from Humphrey's campaign manager, Lawrence O'Brien. In O'Brien's words, here we are again with the familiar Nixon of old, managing with artful rhetoric to convey a vicious and false accusation without taking responsibility for his words, end quote. The subjects of a bombing pause and a Nixon campaign charge of last night came up today at a news conference by Defense Secretary Clifford. Marvin Kalb reports.
After rendezvousing in the State Department garage and driving over to the White House in an unpretentious car, Secretaries Rusk and Clifford, plus General Earl Wheeler, met once again with President Johnson today amidst increasing speculation that a bombing halt is near. The administration sticks to its position that there has been no breakthrough, and at his news conference, Clifford pointedly refused to say whether the current lull in the fighting is the sign the president has been seeking to stop the bombing.
I do not know if this is a sign or not. We know that there have been between 30 and 40,000 North Vietnamese troops moved out of South Vietnam. Some have been moved into Laos, some into Cambodia, some back into North Vietnam. There still remain in South Vietnam some 80,000 North Vietnamese troops.
Saying he does not wish to talk politics, Clifford then sharply refuted a Richard Nixon charge that the U.S. now faces a security gap with Russia.
We have today a substantial military superiority over the Soviet Union, and I shall certainly do all in my power to continue to maintain that superiority as long as I hold this position. Let me reiterate, I do not intend to engage in any political discussion. I am giving you the facts as we understand them to be today in these major categories. In the field of land-based ICBMs, the United States has 1,054. The Soviets have approximately 900. What date is this as of today? With reference to submarine-launched nuclear missiles, we have 656 such missiles. The Soviets have between 75 and 80. Regarding intercontinental bombers, those capable of conveying a nuclear weapon to the Soviet Union or from there to the United States and return, we have 646 such intercontinental bombers. The Soviets have between 150 and 155.
What no administration official would refute today is Nixon's belief that a bombing halt is near. What holds it up, apparently, is agreement on what role Saigon and the National Liberation Front will play in the next stage of the Paris peace talks. Marvin Kalb, CBS News, Washington.
In Laos, Premier Suvarnabhumi said today that the United States informed him that it already has decided to halt the bombing of North Vietnam, but gave no date. The White House declined comment on that statement. Meanwhile, Hanoi radio denounced what it called propaganda statements that the North Vietnamese have accepted U.S. terms for a bombing suspension. The broadcast repeated Hanoi's assertion that it will not de-escalate its military efforts in exchange for an end to the air attacks. It has been reported that a major provision of President Johnson's new peace package calls for the Paris talks to be expanded to include both the Saigon regime and the Viet Cong. But Saigon sources said today that South Vietnam's President Thieu remains firmly opposed to giving the Viet Cong a separate role in the negotiations, arguing that they are nothing more than Hanoi's puppets.
I can't face those cameras today, Fred. Not with this cold.
I can't do it alone, Roger. Here, take 2 Bayer. We're on the air in a few minutes.
Okay, Fred.
Come on, Roger, we're on the air. This is the time of year you can almost expect to get a cold or flu. So be prepared to follow the 3 steps doctors recommend. First, rest in bed, like Roger here. Second, drink plenty of fluids. Finally, take aspirin to reduce fever and relieve aches and pain. Take Bayer aspirin because Bayer is pure aspirin, not just part aspirin. And aspirin is what doctors recommend. So for cold or flu, be sure to rest in bed, drink fluids, and take aspirin to reduce fever and relieve pain.
You know, Fred, I don't feel so bad now. That Bayer is amazing.
Bayer works wonders, Roger.
The rebuttal to Nixon's charge of a security gap came not only from Defense Secretary Clifford. While campaigning in Los Angeles today, Humphrey also responded.
Just as he has throughout this campaign, he is advocating an increased militarization of American life and American foreign policy. Just as he did in 1952, he's playing a numbers game. But this time, it's with our national security. And as usual, his numbers are wrong. At the present time, and for the indefinite future, the United States possesses enough nuclear destructive power, based securely underground and in submarines at sea, to obliterate any aggressor nation or nations. We are the strongest nation on earth.
Humphrey's last few stops in Los Angeles were of the traditional political stump variety, a visit to a delicatessen, where he purchased 2 cheddar cheese bagels and sniffed somewhat timidly at a plate of lox and onions. The vice president leaves California today after some heavy campaigning, mostly among minority groups, whose votes would have to go to him overwhelmingly to give him any chance at all of carrying this state. Bill Plant, CBS News, with the Humphrey campaign in Los Angeles.
George Wallace stumped New Jersey today after one of the most enthusiastic rallies of his third-party campaign. It happened last night in New York City, and Nelson Benton has the story.
It was probably the biggest event in George Wallace's political career since the day he stood in the schoolhouse door. A cheering, chanting crowd of nearly 17,000 in Madison Square Garden. Running mate Curtis LeMay probably helped the gate. But the crowd came to hear Wallace, knowing in advance what he would tell them, that he would, as he likes to say, tell them what they wanted to hear. Selective distribution of tickets confined his crowd largely to supporters, with only a smattering of hecklers on the inside of the hall, just enough to keep up a suitable counterpoint to the cheers. On the outside, though, it was another matter. Many of the some 3,000 police on duty in the area were sorely challenged by protesters whose vehemence matched the enthusiasm inside. Periodic street chaos went on through the evening. But from a political hoopla standpoint, George Wallace scored heavily. He produced noisy evidence that his movement is indeed no longer a sectional one. Nelson Benton, CBS News, New York.
Missouri Democratic Senator Edward Long and Illinois Democratic Representative Barrett O'Hara both lost primary elections and will not be back in Congress in January. But the Associated Press reported today that both are taking junkets abroad. Long is on a 2-month tour of 19 countries to study matters of finance and trade for a Senate committee. And O'Hara, the AP said, is leaving for a month in Africa with staff members of the House Foreign Affairs Committee.
I'd like you to meet a handsome family. This is Millie, our pride and joy. And these are her two sons. What characters. You know, I've brought up a lot of dogs, and I'm often asked about feeding. Everybody knows dogs need meat. Alpo is 100% meat, and that's why so many veterinarians recommend Alpo. With most other dog foods, you don't know where the meat leaves off and the cereal begins. That's because most dog foods are mainly cereal. That's right, mainly cereal. Some up to 70% cereal. Not Alpo. Alpo is 100% meat, not a speck of cereal. Here, Millie. Ladies first. My dogs like all 6 kinds. Alpo beef, chicken, horse meat, liver, lamb, and veal. They cost a little more, naturally. Meat costs more than cereal. See what happens to your dog when you switch him to Alpo.
In England today, several thousand students seized control of London's School of Economics and raised a Viet Cong flag above it. Leaders said they plan to use the building as a medical aid center for anyone hurt in a big demonstration against the Vietnam War this Sunday. Police made no effort to clear the school. For the second time this week, Eric Hoffer, the longshoreman and philosopher who sits on the President's Violence Commission, has gotten into an argument with a witness at the committee's hearings. Daniel Shore was on hand for today's confrontation.
The President's Commission on Violence had its own moment of verbal violence today. Herman Blake, militant supporter of the Black Panthers, told of the rage of the ghetto, was challenged by philosopher Eric Hoffer, saying rage was not enough.
All my life, I was poor, and I didn't live better than any Negro ever lived, I can tell you. When I was out and picking cotton in the San Joaquin Valley, the Negroes were eating better than I did, living in better houses, they had more schooling than I did. And
sir, have you ever been called a nigger?
Let me finish it. By the way, the first man in the United States, I think, who wrote about the need to create a Negro community was I in 1964.
Then why do you stop us from becoming a community then?
I say that you have to build a community. You have to build a community, and you are not.
We can't be the community with white people like you around telling us we can't be what we are.
You are going to build it by rage. You are going to build it by working together.
You see, you're defining it.
They haven't raised one blade of grass. They haven't raised one brick.
We've been throwing them, baby, because you've been out there stopping us from laying them and raising grass.
Sorry.
Blake stood up to walk out, but was induced to stay while Commission Vice Chairman Leon Higginbotham supported him against Hoffer.
Mr. Blake.
Mr. Chairman, if I may, I think that Mr. Hoffer's statements are indicative of the great racist pathology in our country, and his views are those which represent the mass people in this country. I think that what Toynbee said, that civilizations are destroyed from within, that his comments are a classic example of proving that.
This was the most passionate session we've had, said one commission member, but passion provided no answer to violence, only pointed up the growing communications gap. Daniel Shore, CBS News, Washington.
Defense Secretary Clifford, at his news conference today, announced that the Navy will resume construction of a controversial new quiet submarine. The electric-driven nuclear-powered sub will cost between $150 and $200 million. The Apollo 7 astronauts are nearing the end of their initial debriefing at Cape Kennedy, and tomorrow will fly to Houston for a reunion with their families. The space agency has released some remarkable still photos the trio took while they were circling the Earth. This is Hurricane Gladys, 600 miles wide, as it churned its way in the Gulf of Mexico, some 150 miles southwest of Tampa, Florida. 12 of the world's tallest mountains, including the tallest 5-mile-high Mount Everest, is seen from 130 nautical miles up. Houston, Texas, there in the lower right, in the Gulf Coast area, looking southeast as the morning sun reflects brilliantly off the Gulf. Sunrise bursts across the Florida Peninsula and Cape Kennedy, where this fantastic space voyage began. Richard Cardinal Cushing said today that because of adverse publicity and hate mail he had received in the aftermath of the Jacqueline Kennedy-Aristotle Onassis marriage, he will offer his resignation to Pope Paul at the end of this year. Cardinal Cushing, in an interview with CBS radio station WEEI, pointed out he had intended to retire in 1970. He is 73. He also denied having encouraged the former First Lady to marry Onassis. Barbara Ann Eisenhower, the 19-year-old granddaughter of former President Eisenhower, is going to beat her older brother David to the altar. Barbara Ann's father, Colonel John Eisenhower, confirmed today that his daughter plans to wed 25-year-old Fernando Echeverria Uribe of Bogota, Colombia. But he refused to comment on reports that his son David, who is engaged to Richard Nixon's daughter Julie, will marry before Christmas. In Da Nang, South Vietnam today, a happy Marine captain by the name of Charles Robb passed out fistfuls of cigars because halfway around the world his wife, Linda Johnson Robb, gave birth to a baby girl. There was also a very happy grandfather in Washington, and Robert Pierpoint reports.
A proud president handed out cigars to men and lady reporters alike early this morning at Bethesda Naval Hospital in honor of his new granddaughter. He said Mother Linda was fine, but has not yet picked a name for her baby, who weighs 7 pounds 8 ounces, has black hair, and good lung power.
We saw the baby at close range, and the baby was expressing herself as you females do quite often.
After everyone had rested up from the big night, President Johnson returned to the hospital about midday. This time he took with him his first grandchild, Patrick Linden, now 18 months old, who wanted to take a peek at his new cousin. So far, no pictures available, but Mrs. Johnson gave this perhaps slightly biased description.
The baby's fine, very pink and vocal. 7.5 pounds. Just, yeah. Well formed. They tell me. She's pretty.
Justice William Douglas today accused the Army and the Solicitor General of sending 105 Kentucky soldiers to Vietnam a day ahead of schedule so they would be on their way before the Supreme Court could consider their case. In Douglas's words, no one, not even the Department of Justice nor the military, is above the law. The soldiers had contended they were state militia who may be mobilized only to fight a declared war. They've been scheduled to ship out today, but they left yesterday. Prices on the New York Stock Exchange closed generally higher today on a volume of 14,150,000 shares. The exchange index gained 17 cents.
Baby's upset tummy and yours have a lot in common. It's a well-known medical fact that eating too much or too fast can cause pressure and gas. Here's the best solution for baby. For you, Digel, the extra action antacid. Digel not only neutralizes excess acid, it has the extra action of simethicone that breaks up bubbles of gas. Helps you feel better fast. When you eat too well, demand Digel.
Watch. There's going to be an accident. For those stinging cuts and scrapes, spray away pain with Solarcane. Solarcane stops skin pain faster, more effectively than ordinary first aids that contain no pain-killing ingredients. Solarcane spray, lotion, or cream all contain benzocaine, medication used by doctors. Stop skin pain with Solarcane. For minor burns, cuts, and scrapes. Solarcane.
In the final report of our series on the candidates and where they stand, we turn tonight to issues involving the national economy. In separate filmed interviews, Hubert Humphrey and George Wallace answered the questions we prepared for these reports. Although Richard Nixon declined to participate directly, his staff provided videotape recordings of his campaign statements. We asked the candidates, what would you do to slow down the rising cost of living?
Cut down on unnecessary federal spending, spending that brings no return to the American public, which brings about inflationary pressures in our country. Take some of the welfare money and poverty money and put it in a public works program so that any able-bodied citizen of any race who's without a job could find a job on a public works program to build roads, drainage ditches, water towers, inland docks, schools, or what have you. I feel a program of this sort would gain respect for the individual, but continuing to give people money on these poverty programs, not only, in my judgment, destroys self-respect and initiative, but it also is inflationary within itself.
When I become president, one of the first things that I will do is to meet with the representatives of labor and management and finance to talk about how we can enter into a voluntary program of wage price stability. And I will call a national conference of labor and management for that very purpose, because everyone has a stake in wage and price stability. At least a very modest increase you can tolerate, but large increases in prices are erosive on the economy. One final thing, I've included in my Social Security proposal an escalator clause for those that are on fixed Social Security income. As the cost of living goes up, their benefits will go up. Now, somebody's going to say, well, now, doesn't that cost money? Yes, but you've got an expanding economy.
Now, I think we ought to have a new fiscal policy in Washington, D.C., in which we stop the rise in the cost of living, so that when an individual earns $1 and puts it into Social Security or into life insurance or in pensions, that then he gets $1 worth when he retires 5 or 10 or 15 years from now. And that would be, it seems to me, the most effective thing that we could do for those living on Social Security right now. Stop the rise in the cost of their living and stop the reduction of the capital that they have in their pensions. And then second, I think that we ought to provide, as the Republican platform advocates, and this was as a result of mine and others who recommended it, we ought to provide for an automatic increase in Social Security benefits whenever the cost of living goes up. We should do that. And then third, as and when the economy of this country gets to the place that we can afford to do more without destroying the value of our dollars, then of course we should increase Social Security benefits.
Would you drop the 10% tax surcharge now scheduled to expire next June?
I do believe that tax is an anti-inflationary force, and it has worked and has helped. Had it been adopted a little earlier, I think we would have had better price stability and less inflationary pressure in this country. So first of all, it will automatically come off. That's clear. For it to be put back on, it'll have to be reenacted by the Congress. If I were the President of the United States, I would not ask for it to be put back on unless there was clear evidence that there were inflationary pressures that were getting out of control, and unless the war was continuing at the rate, at the present intensity or its present intensity.
I think that once the war is ended, that we should get rid of the surtax. It is a war tax, and it should be ended, because I think the tax level in this country, rather than going up, should be reduced.
Well, I hope the surcharge can be dropped. Of course, it would depend upon circumstances, and I want to be honest about it. I would like to see it drop. I would like to see this surcharge and some other taxes replaced on the average citizen in our country by removing the tax exemption feature on multi-billion-dollar tax-exempt foundations that get by almost scot-free without paying any taxes, while the average citizen has his nose to the grindstone. So if the Congress will do that for me when I'm the president, we can drop the surcharge. And not only that, we can raise the dependents allowance from $600 to $1,000, $1,200 for every citizen of our country.
The president of the Houston Astrodome today invited Nixon and Humphrey, but not Wallace, to debate there on Sunday before the election. If either declines, in the words of the invitation, the facility will remain available on the same basis to the party who does accept. But Humphrey accepted, with Nixon or without. The Astrodome said it had not heard from Nixon.
Look, you're always tired.
I wish I knew why.
It could be iron-poor, tired blood. You may need Geritol. The great majority of tired people don't feel that way because of iron-poor blood, and Geritol won't help them, but millions do have iron-poor blood, and you could be tired for that very reason and need Geritol. Geritol iron enters your bloodstream fast, carrying strength throughout your body. For iron-poor, tired blood, take Geritol and feel stronger fast.
Go ahead, splash it on, and get the Frostline lift. The Aqua Velva Frostline lift. Want a lift with Frostline. Frostline is the refreshing new aftershave with livelier lines for that Frostline lift.
There's something about an Aquavelva man.
Get that Aquavelva Frostline lift.
With the election just 11 days away, Eric Severide looks ahead to a major problem awaiting the winner, whoever he may be. Eric?
Every presidential election campaign is at least a little different from every other. And if the candidates themselves do not greatly vary in their approaches to their audience, the audience varies from year to year in its reception of the candidates. There is a pattern to the audiences that both leading candidates are talking to this year, at least those that this reporter has mingled with. The cheering enthusiasts are a more distinct minority than ever. Many of them have to be organized and instructed in advance, and they often consist chiefly of youngsters below college age. The adult voting age portion of the typical audience is reserved, courteous, but mysteriously silent. It is not merely that neither candidate is overly blessed with personal charisma. There is a certain mood of fatigue in the audiences, as if the average citizen's capacity for enthusiasm about anybody, about any public program or promise, has been exhausted. It gives an observer the feeling that anything can happen when those votes are counted election day. But it also gives one a more definite feeling about what will happen after election day and after inaugural day. There's going to be a show-me attitude everywhere. This time everybody's from Missouri. The new president's political honeymoon will be short, whoever he is. There is still a generous instinct among most people to give a new leader the benefit of the doubt for a time. But after the next inauguration, that time is going to be shorter than usual. And if the new leader does not produce results soon, or at a minimum convince the people that he is moving heaven and earth to do so, then the general reaction against him is going to be very serious and nationwide. It raises the question of which candidate is now making the wiser approach. The areas of actual and potential explosion in this country are not in the farming and small town and suburban areas where Nixon is strong. They are in the slums, among the Negroes, in the intellectual communities. Humphrey is making promises to these groups, and they will hold him to them. And promises failed can have a worse effect than promises not made. Nixon, on the other hand, is not even in serious communication with these groups. He is not going into the slums or into the colleges. And if he is avoiding the risk of promises to them, he takes on the risk of alienation from them. So whoever next occupies the White House will start from behind, with no specific definable mandate from the people. If he is to have a consensus, he will have to create it himself. And that will be a test of a severity rarely imposed upon an American president. Walter?
And that's the way it is. Friday, October 25th, 1968. This is Walter Cronkite, CBS News. Good night.
Smooth, comfortable shave. Why shouldn't injector users have a smooth, comfortable shave, too? Introducing the electro-coated injector blade.
This has been the CBS Evening News with Walter Cronkite. Republican presidential candidate Richard M. Nixon will be the guest on the evening edition of CBS News Face the Nation this Sunday at 6:30, 5:30 Central Time on CBS.